Hello, this is Matt on the Moon Family Sedan channel. As everybody is aware at this point, there have been 3 banks in the past week that have collapsed. And there's an Australian investor who's with a firm that manages, I think it was $3 billion in assets under management. And this particular investor is blaming depositors for not engaging in better due diligence. And David Schwartz, who of course is Ripple's CTO and also a co-creator of XRP and the XRP ledger, he says, quote, "That's a dumb take," end quote. And David Schwartz is correct. That is a very dumb take. So I want to talk about it. But before going further, I do want to be clear. I do not have a financial background of any kind. I am not offering financial advice. And you definitely should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. I'm just an enthusiast who enjoys making YouTube videos about crypto-related topics, but just as a hobby and just for fun. All right, and so this discussion stems from this article from Bloomberg titled, "Startups Need to Learn Banking Risks," Australian investor says. The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank shows that technology startups should be doing more due diligence on their banking partners, according to one of Australia's biggest venture capital firms. Paul Bassett, co-founder of Square Peg Capital, which manages $3 billion in assets, said Silicon Valley Bank's demise is a, quote, "real opportunity for all of us to think about the risks we're taking and to mitigate those risks. You need to understand who the bank is, who you bank with. You need to understand risk mitigation. You need to have your deposits spread across a range of different banking institutions. You don't want to have exposure to a single organization," end quote. And that's what he said in a Bloomberg television interview. And, look, one piece where I can agree is that it makes sense to have, exposure to a bunch of different banks so that if one actually does fail, well, that would be a good position to be in should that occur. Not have all of your eggs in one basket. But beyond that, and I've made my position pretty damn clear, so I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time repeating it, but I first blame the government because they're the ones that created the system that we're in. They also hiked the interest rates on top of that, which ultimately led to this. I blame the banks who are operating within this system, and they're forced in the system just like we all are, but they can make boneheaded moves, and some of them did, including Silicon Valley Bank. Made very poor decisions. Not good at being a bank, effectively. But I'll tell you who I don't blame is the depositors. And I just can't relate to anybody that's blaming the depositors. And some of them are individuals. And a lot of it, especially with Silicon Valley Bank, it's businesses. It's just a bunch of businesses here. But the idea that even if you engage in due diligence, which I'm not against, I'm not saying don't engage in due diligence. What I'm saying is you're never going to know all of the nuts and bolts. Even if you're talking about a publicly traded company, yes, there are certain disclosures that have to be made per SEC regulations. That's true. But you're never going to be privy to the insider information. You're never going to know all the nuts and bolts. And so the idea that, your typical depositor who's trying to run a business could stay on top of that week after week after week after week, and that they could even have the information necessary to make pertinent decisions, the idea that to me, that's a fantasy land thing. And David Schwartz seems to agree. And so David Schwartz, in response to this article, he said, "That's a dumb take." I love the bluntness. You got to love David Schwartz. He's right. He said, "That's a dumb take." And check this out, too. I hadn't mentioned this on my channel yet. I've been wanting to, but he wrote the following. Forbes rated Silicon Valley Bank the 20th best bank in America a month ago. Moody's gave them an A rating 2 weeks ago. Should all startups be doing due diligence on their banks every week? Should all startups be better at bank diligence than Forbes and Moody's? So, folks, think about that. When it comes to Forbes and Moody's, they're considered to be reputable. They do homework. They look into things. And if they can't uncover it, you're expecting your typical startup company to be able to do that and then stay on top of that week after week. When they're in startup, mind you, when you start a business, you're typically losing lots of money, like lots and lots of money. That's how it goes. Many times for years on end. I know this very personally because I started a company with my brother in 2010. It's been 13 years and here we are, worked out. But lost money for years. And I can only imagine, like, so I was supposed to stay on top of my bank week after week after week. It's not tenable. And even if you attempt to do that, I'm telling you, it's a futile effort. That's the point that I'm making. You don't blame the depositors. And so I wrote back to David Schwartz there. I said, 100%. I can't relate to people who blame depositors, especially if they don't blame the party most responsible, government. Now, there's an attorney named Arturo Portilla who seems to some degree, disagree. And I think he's mistaken in his approach, but I thought it made for an interesting conversation. So I'm going to share with you what attorney Portilla had to say to David Schwartz. He wrote, I don't think it's entirely dumb, to be honest. Some startups don't do any due diligence at all. It's also common that they don't have treasury management policies in place. Startups who want to succeed should 100% know the risks they're exposed to and how to properly manage them. Concentration of treasury operations is a huge risk, even when you hold banking relationships with the largest banks. This is risk management 101, really. And so the part, again, where I can agree, and the same with the Australian investor, is, yeah, of course, in terms of proper management, having exposure to various banks, that does make sense. I don't think you're going to find a lot of pushback from anyone on that, but that's not the broader point that's being made here. And so David Schwartz jumped back in and he said, what you are saying is not dumb. It does not, however, have any relationship whatsoever to the position that startups, quote, should be doing more due diligence on their banking partners, end quote, which is the dumb take. And again, I could not agree more with David Schwartz here. It's a futile effort. You're not going to be privy to all this information, even if it's a publicly traded company. Yes, again, I understand there are certain disclosures, but you're never going to know. And it's not a reasonable position regardless. But Attorney Portilla pushed back and he said, just asked a question. He said, why specifically do you think that's a dumb take? What is it that startups shouldn't be doing and why? And David Schwartz wrote, they should not expect to be able to due diligence large banks. That's way outside the capability of pretty much any startup. If it was possible to detect this through diligence, it would have been all anyone was talking about the past few months. And so, folks, this has been a problem. We've been leading up to this point, literally, as David Schwartz points out, 4 months. If it's something that anyone could detect, somebody would have detected, it would have been divulged, and it would have become common knowledge. But the idea that all of these banks, if they had just looked into it a little bit further, because again, there's over $200 billion from depositors, and 97% of it not insured by FDIC. But the idea that all of that, close to $200 billion worth of deposits, if you just would have looked into it a little further, all of them, they could have just figured it out. They could have just figured it out, right, folks? What a silly ass idea. That's why David Schwartz, I appreciate the bluntness. It's a dumb take. It really is truly a dumb take. There's no way. What do you think that they could have looked at that would have divulged all? Anyway, I also wanted to mention this. There's this story from the Crypto Basic. Former SEC Advisory Committee member says agency underestimated Ripple. J.W. Verrett, an associate law professor at George Mason University and a former member of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission Investor Advisory Committee, has let slip that the agency underestimated Ripple. Verrett shared this view in a Crypto Law TV stream yesterday that has made the rounds on Twitter. It came in response to inquiries from Crypto Law founder attorney John Deaton on why the SEC chose to go after Ripple, which is well funded. Verrett said the agency underestimated the fight in Brad Garlinghouse, Ripple's chief executive officer. The former SEC advisor said the regulator probably expected a settlement, a distant projection from how things have turned out. He said, quote, I don't think they saw that coming, and I think they probably expected there would be a settlement, end quote. And then he also said, I think they underestimated the fight inside of Brad. Yeah, end quote. And so that's in line with the message that I've been delivering, because that's my personal perspective as well. I don't think that the SEC had any idea what they were getting into, frankly, when they sued Ripple. I don't think they understood the actual community, comprised of millions of people the world over. I don't think they understood that there's an XRP community that big and that committed, unrelated to Ripple specifically. I don't think they had any earthly idea, and that's how you end up with attorney John Deaton as amicus representing somewhere in the neighborhood of 76,000 XRP holders, which is unprecedented, has never happened in the history of mankind. Like, this has never happened, anything like this. But it did happen. And the SEC, they absolutely didn't see this coming, and it is substantially harming their case. Piece continues. Meanwhile, in the video over whether the SEC case against Ripple could make it to the U.S. Supreme Court, the professor noted that the journey there could exceed Deaton's prediction for crypto legislation. According to Verret, assuming an appealable ruling on summary judgment, the journey from the appeal court to the Supreme Court could take 4 to 5 years. Yeah, and so I've been mentioning that at least once or twice over the last few days. 4 to 5 years. That's the estimate from Verret. You know, should it get? That's why I'm hoping that, you know, even if Ripple loses, I'm hoping that there can be some sort of settlement after that in the remedies portion that would be agreeable. I don't know if it's going to happen. And on the flip side, I'm more concerned if Ripple does win. What's the SEC going to do? They're not going to appeal. I think it gets appealed in that case. So we'll see anyway. But Verret notes that he expects crypto firms to make breakthroughs in the appellate and Supreme Courts, noting that the SEC has managed to stretch Howey's test in crypto enforcement actions in the past few years. He points out that the nuance of the doctrine is more important in these courts. He also says amicus briefs are essential at these levels as they give the judge different ways to overturn the SEC's arguments. Yeah, it's crucial, and what Attorney Deaton has done was highly consequential and an obvious net plus. We've seen that play out to this point. So any day now, we're going to wake up and just see the news of ruling from Judge Torres. Cross your fingers, folks. I'm optimistic, though. I really am. I'm not a financial advisor. You should not buy or sell anything because of anything I say or write. That would be a very, very, very bad idea. Until next time, to the Moon Family Sedan.